Hello and welcome to Media 7 in front of a live audience at Auckland's Classic Comedy Club. In this week's show, we'll look into television's tyranny of youth with a programmer, an ad man and a disgruntled viewer of Herne Bay. It's a situation that was neatly summed up in one short, sharp sentence.
I'm over 50 myself, and I want something to watch.
But first, from the Auckland super city to the H in Wanganui, the prospect of culturally distinct prisons and the review of the seabed and foreshore legislation, important stories for and about Maori are crowding the headlines. But if our politics permanently changed with the arrival of the Maori Party, it's less clear how the position of Maori issues in the media has evolved. Joining us tonight are three men, the women were too busy working apparently, whose lives have been part of the media landscape. Dr Ranganui Walker, whakatohea, whose listener column was for years almost a lone voice for Maori in the mainstream media. Ken Mair, Wanganui, who became a media figure during the 3-month occupation of Mautua Gardens and once got on the news by invading the TVNZ studio during a live bulletin. And Willie Jackson, Ngāti Maniapoto and Ngāti Porou, who as host of Eye to Eye on TVNZ and Willie and JT on Radio Live is perhaps the most prominent Maori face in the mainstream media. Welcome to you all, gentlemen. Now, Dr Walker, I'd like to start by talking about your listener column, which ran, what, 1972 to 1990. Right. At that time, it seemed to me you were almost a lone voice in the media doing what you were doing. What do you make of that column looking back on it now?
Well, I was fortunate in being employed in the academy, and that put me at the interface of cultural politics between Māori and Pākehā. And I was observing the rise of Maori activism and recording it. And when I got the opportunity to write for the listener, I welcomed it because I could then relate what was going on in the Maori world to Pākehā so that they were not too spooked when the real activists came out.
You explained it, and I thought that was a very valuable role. Do you think, is that still a relevant role now? Is there anyone doing it now?
Well, there are lots more Maori people. In those days, there were very few qualified Maori academics. Nowadays, they are numbered in 500, I think. And there are many able people in various walks of life who are communicating to Pākehā and explaining Maori issues to them. And the advent of Maori television has added to that, and the work of people like Willie and his mate John on their radio station. This created a tremendous dialogue in our nation that is moving us in a positive way forward. Now,
you were in that role as explainer on a show on 3 News this week about the Geographical Board's decision about the discovery that the North and South Island weren't actually the official names. Yeah. I thought you acquitted yourself well in that story, but I also thought perhaps that there was a story that the reporter was looking for conflict. Did you get that impression?
I'm not sure, but the point I made there, that naming is very important. To name is to claim, as Captain Cook did when he named Young Nick's Head, but the place had already been named by the other rivals. And the other point about naming is that you bring the names from your own homeland and plant them in the new land. And both cultures have done that. And these are the things that Pākehā people don't quite seem to understand. You know, you take Cambridge and Oxford. Oxford is now Tito, but those are the names that they brought. So you transport names from your homeland. And the other thing is that names actually have meaning, particularly in a pre-literate culture that Māori have, that they record their history. They didn't write, they recorded their history and the names on the landscape. So when Tia explored inland towards Lake Taupo, he came to these beautiful rapids and he named them Aratiatia, the Stairway of Tia. Now what a beautiful name, and that's preserved on the landscape, which preserves that history. And then when he went to Taupo, he called that Taupo Nui a Tia, because there was a cloak-like marking on the cliff face. So names are important, and that's why we need to use them correctly, pronounce them correctly, and also spell them correctly.
Indeed, which is probably where we should go to you, Ken. You're in the midst of a big naming dispute over the H in Wanganui. How's that been for you? I mean, how's the local paper, the Wanganui Chronicle, treating you? Are you getting a fair shake there?
Oh, generally, the paper, the Chronicle, our local paper, has treated the issue fairly from our point of view. There's certainly been 1 or 2 articles that we've been concerned about, but the editorials is the measure from my point of view anyway. And I've noted that within the editorials, they've been reasonably fair in regard to our name. In regard to the media from a national point of view, apart from TV3, generally the coverage has been reasonably okay. TV3, certainly from our point of view, has looked for some conflict in regard to the name, and in a sense has belittled the whole story from my point of view anyway, in the particular direction that they've taken. So,
how have you handled it? How have you presented this story to the media? Because it's obviously something you want reported.
Oh, from our point of view, and representing our iwi, it's a very simple issue. It is about respect and integrity of our name. Our name is our identity. Our name is recorded within our river, within our landscape, and a mistake has been made. And so, from our point of view, if the mistake has been made, it needs correcting. It's as simple as that. And we've also stated quite publicly that it's really not about a race issue. It's more about correcting a mistake. Sure, our name comes from our history, comes from our culture, comes from our language. But at the end of the day, if we spell your name wrong, you'd expect us to correct it. And that's respect and upholding your name and giving it an integrity. It's simple.
Let's talk about the word as it should be. Does the H being there change the pronunciation?
Well,
would you say that word differently than Ranganui would?
Possibly, and depending on the dialect where people come from, of course, tribally, iwi. But from our point of view, it's best explained, I suppose, in regard to what we call a glottal stop or something along those lines. I mean, it's very clear to our ears when we hear it that in regard to Wanganui compared to Wanganui or Whanganui,
it's a softer sound, yeah.
Yeah, it's a softer sound, a different sound. It's our sound, it's our mita, it's our dialect. And from our point of view, it should be respected. And also that if people genuinely try to pronounce our name correctly, that's great. And if they get it correct, that's excellent. It's when people continually, deliberately mispronounce our name, deliberately misspell our name, then the question arises in one's mind around the values of us as a people. You know, those universal values of respect and integrity.
And when we're talking about people, we're talking about the Mayor of Wanganui, Michael Laws, who is in the unusual position of having his own media soapbox. How's that affected things? Do you think that's fair that he can do that?
Oh, that's the reality. I mean, from our point of view, it's not about Michael Laws, it's not about personalities. We're driven by the fact that our name has been misspelt for a very long time. We're focused on the kaupapa, that's the issue from our point of view, and we're not going to get trapped into some form of personality debate. Here's the issue. The correction of our name needs to occur, and let's focus on that. It's not about Michael Laws.
Is this something you have to sell to the local people? Because they did vote in that one poll where they didn't really have the information, but they voted against the H going in. Is it incumbent on you to tell them why it's important?
Oh, I mean, it's accepted that the misspelling of our name has been going on for a long time. It's not accepted that that's right. And therefore, there is a responsibility, I think, that we should go out there and inform people of why we believe that our name should be spelled correctly. That's the reality of the situation.
Willie, have you canvassed this one on your radio show? I can imagine that your audience might have quite a range of views on it. Would that be fair?
Yeah, most of them are against it, unfortunately, but we've got there's a fair amount who support it. We do our best to try and change their views.
So JT's on board with this. You actually agree on this
well, he's
one.
a Maori on this one. You know, he's got a flip-flop position sometimes. Depends on the day, but at the moment he's Mr. Tino Rangatiratanga, so it's going quite well.
You do almost all your work as a Maori in the mainstream media, and even in a somewhat hostile environment on the radio there. Did you choose that?
Yeah, I did.
Why?
Did because mainstream media's got in my view, a history of shame in terms of dealing with Maori issues. You talked about Rangi writing for the Listener between 1972 and 1990. How many Maori write for the Listener now? I don't think any. I don't think any. And if you canvass around all the different newspapers, how many Māori writers do we have? Virtually zero. And so whilst things have improved, and Ken pointed to it, things are improving, and you see it sometimes with Campbell, no doubt about that. Sainsbury too. Close-Up's done some really good stuff on Waitangi. You've got to give credit where credit's due. Radio Live, of course, is leading the way. While things, there's been some improvement. Let's not forget there's a history there that needs to be addressed. And Rangi should be writing now. We should have Māori columns in the Herald, but we can't get there. And I think it's sad, and we need to address it.
Rangi, would you like to be writing on these issues now, or do you see yourself as retired?
Well, I've been retired 10 years, and I've trained a number of students, and one or two of them are coming through. The columnist Rawiri Tony, for example, in the Herald, he does a good job, and his perspective and his analysis followed on from what I've done. And it's time for the oldies to give up. The new net goes a-fishing.
You mentioned Maori television, which obviously is doing all kinds of valuable things, but do you think we've lost something with there not being a voice like yours, a very clear voice in the mainstream media, the kind of thing that Willie's doing? It's Maori talking to Maori rather than, should there be someone there to talk to Pākehā?
Well, I think Maori television is filling the gap beautifully, because when an issue arises, they will call in a Pākehā politician to answer. So the Pākehā politician is made answerable to the Māori constituency, and I think that's wonderful. So there's less need for people of my calibre to be writing that kind of stuff.
Are you often approached for comment? Do you give it when you know?
All the time. I have to have my wife to manage my diary.
Ken, one thing I wanted to ask you about is you were a deeply polarising figure in the news, particularly in the early 90s. What's changed? Have you changed, or has the news changed?
Oh, apart from my haircut, I think I haven't changed much, really.
It's a much nicer haircut now, actually.
Seriously, I think that I think there has been a shift within our communities in regard to some of the issues. Has the shift gone far enough in regard to where some of us are thinking? Probably not. From my point of view, definitely not. If we're going to talk about constitutional change, but the issues that one articulated in the early 90s, late 80s, etc., are still, burning in my heart, and that's clearly come through in regard to some of the issues I've been involved in recent times on behalf of my iwi, the spelling of our name, land bank property issues, etc., those types of things.
Well, I suppose the difference is now that you don't have to gate crash the studio, we actually invite you on.
Yeah, well, don't tempt me.
Yes. Well, I'd look forward to it. We'll take a break now and come back with a look at a different kind of Maori media.